I will introduce Louise Romain. Her background is in anthropology. She graduated in 2019 after studying at 5 different universities. And since then, she has been working as a campaigner for climate justice and indigenous rights. She loves to reflect on systemic norms, interpersonal relationships, power dynamics, and privileges. She's passionately involved in the defense of human and more than human communities and dedicated to protect diversity, all forms of life on Earth. Louise entered the world of sonic production a year ago and is currently exploring the ideas of sound activism and multi-species storytelling by creating immersive sound journeys with her show Circle of Voices, which you can find on Spotify and SoundCloud. Please welcome Louise Romain.
Thank you. Bonjour à tous, guten Morgen, buongiorno a tutti, good morning everyone. I find it important to greet in different languages in the acknowledgement of the many cultures that are in the room. And I really want to bring in the concept of language justice that I learned from a friend. So please, I hope you will feel courageous enough to intervene if there is a vocabulary that you don't understand, or if I speak too fast, use the hand signals, because I get so passionate about these things. And yeah, I think it's important to understand that English isn't necessarily the first language for maybe most of us in the room. I want to just bring a little outline of what I'm going to do. You should all have received a little piece of paper. Hopefully, if we have time, that will be for like a little interactive exercise at the end. And I'm going to be sharing my story. There's going to be some recordings I'm going to play from my show and also a piece of spoken word. Yes, so I want to start by like situating my identity, definitely taking this concept from the living legend that Donna Haraway is, by the way. And I was born in France, and I think probably the way that I identify the most is as an earthling, so like a citizen or a being of the earth. And that's both, I think, spiritually, but also because I have grown roots in different countries and I really feel held in different parts of the world. So I was mentioned, I studied anthropology. I started doing my undergrad at the Freie Universität in Berlin, and also studied a few languages like Spanish, Chinese, and Indonesian, all in German. So if you weren't sure that I'm a complete language nerd by now, it's totally official. And the project I started working on in my undergrad is on this website. And I'm not going to go so much into details because it's still available online, but basically it was the idea to explore cultural revitalization among First Nations in Quebec, working really closely with a group of young women. And something I really wanted to look at is like, how do they connect with their roots and culture with ongoing colonialism and oppression? And so there's different threads that I explore in this project, something around like resisting the stereotypes and harmful representations of Indigenous people that are still very alive nowadays, even in a country like Canada. And also really looking at like how to disseminate and digitize Indigenous knowledge. And so I learned coding and programming, and I coded this website with incredible help as well. And the idea is in this circle, which is based on the medicine wheel. Some of you might be familiar with that. And so these are all like interactive components. And as you can see, there is like, so for example, sharing circles, participatory photography, but also sound recordings. So that was like my first time actually going into places and like playing with like a really crappy little microphone. And then one of the exploration with this was kind of to go beyond the textual production of academia and actually see how can I use technologies to both like connect with the participants and also share some of the results of the research. And this is very much what I carried forth with my master degree at Aalborg Universitet in Copenhagen in this like really unique master program called Techno-Anthropology. And so I explored some more, and you can find like the thesis and stuff like this in here, but like things around mediation, translation of the content, and also looking at power dynamics around collaborating as a white European women with indigenous people and all of these kind of like ethical questions that it brought. Yeah, and I ended my, as mentioned, I ended my academic chapter in 2019, and basically the pandemic kind of brought a lot of disruption, like for so many of us, and I ended up moving to England, to a small town called Stroud in the southwest, and started getting involved in the climate movement, working for an organization called Stop Ecocide. I'm just going to pull up the website as well, because why not? We're all about promotion. Which is a really amazing campaign. I invite you to check it out. It's since I started getting involved in 2017, it really grew into this massive global movement. And it's definitely one of the campaigns that gives me a lot of hope and faith when we think about the climate crisis and ecological collapse. But what this brought me to is going to COP26 in Glasgow, which seeded an idea to go visit the front lines and actually, so that's like what's written in my abstract, like connect with lands, waterways and peoples impacted by the fossil fuels, logging and mining industries, and really like go and learn from places and cultures who have already experienced the end of the world, whether it's genocide, slavery or extermination. And I think we are coming to a point in our European, Western, global North cultures of like existential crisis, and we have never maybe faced that. So there was like, what stories of resistance and resilience can I harvest from these lands? And sure enough, I set off last summer solstice in 2022. And so this piece of spoken word I want to read now was actually written in 2016, the first time I traveled to Canada, but I feel that it is very relevant still for this journey. It's called Web of Chance. Disclaimer, I haven't actually never read poetry at an academic conference before, so this is quite exciting. I just felt like the idea to like bring a bit of art and beauty in a sometimes quite stiff academic setting was quite exciting to me. So yeah, here we go. I heard a call, and so I showed up. Leaving home, crossing the ocean, hungry for learnings, the heart full of passion, coming on this land with a big vision, not quite ready to meet that bitter illusion. How ignorant was I? While starting this journey, how innocent am I? Well, I had no idea. I heard a call, and so I listened. To the ways the stories were told, to the tragedies where too much was sold. Now I honor how we are all so bold, and I wonder how we can together grow old. I heard a call, and so I stepped into this fascinating community where it isn't only about love, peace and harmony, where we share what hurts and what feels wrong, enabling us to truly bond. Questioning my history, feeling unsettled in this fragmented reality, pushing me to reframe my identity. Quite hard with the mic. Simply being challenged by life's fertility. I am thankful for the gifts, the former, the present, and the future ones. I am thankful for the relationships, the former, the present, and the future ones. So let's rise with hope and mutual understanding. Let's go face the world, ready for healing, transforming it into a better place to live in for all coming generations and forms of being. So this is the trip I did. It was in two parts. The Canadian chapter went from east to west, landing in Montreal and going all the way across. And again, because of time constrictions, I'm not going to go much into details, but I just want you to notice the indigenous names on the map and the marking of indigenous territories that I visited. And I think it's like both a decolonial approach, but also a way to acknowledge that in the naming, in the ancient naming of places, there is so much meaning held in connection to land. So yeah, you're welcome to explore that. But I do want to share a sound journey that I produced for an organization based in British Columbia called Raven Trust, and actually came full circle. So after my time in Brazil, I came back to Montreal for the Biodiversity COP15, which some of you might not be aware of, but basically there was like a major agreement signed there, which is the same thing as the Paris Agreement, but for nature. It's called the Global Biodiversity Framework, the GBF. And I recorded a conference as well as doing recording of the Athabasca River in Edmonton. And so this is a little insight into this. Just check. The person you're going to hear speaking is called Daniel Tessele. He's from the Dene Nation, lawyer and advocate, and works for Keepers of the Water, who was giving this press conference.
Brought me to cross that same ocean.
On our self-determination issues, and I also work for Keepers of the Water as their Northwest Territories outreach manager. Canada is absolutely required to obtain the free, prior, and informed consent of all impacted Indigenous nations before enacting Fisheries Act regulations that would legalize the release of toxic tailings into the largest watershed in Canada and the most impact large-scale ecosystem on the continent. And this ecosystem is the broader Mackenzie River Basin. This is a watershed that contains the longest river in Canada and covers 1/5 of the landmass in Canada. It's home to massive amounts of biodiversity and pristine areas of boreal forest. It is the Arctic Amazon. And its tributaries, the headwaters of this watershed, includes the Athabasca River, where this proposed dumping of treated tailings would occur.
The broader Mackenzie River Basin is one of the major flyways for migratory waterfowl, and that area of the Peace-Athabasca Delta is one of the key stopping points that hundreds of thousands of migratory waterfowl use each year on their migrations. It's home to key species like whooping crane, Wood Bluff Buffalo National Park is home to bison species and is one of the last places where on the continent where wolves and bison have their natural historic predator-prey relationship still intact. Any contaminant.
Thanks for listening. I guess in my work, I really want to bring together stories from the front line and voices from nature. And I feel here it was really exciting to find the sound library of the Yellowstone National Park, which has the same endemic species as the area that Daniel is talking about, and have almost like a conversation between these species and his own, the telling of the story. And yeah, I guess it's like part of the questions that I have, and some of the answers have really come up in the last few days, is like, how can we represent the non-human, or I prefer more than human world, in ways that are somewhat intelligible to us, but also like leave some of the magic and some of the beauty of these nature voices. Yeah, and then maybe just a short story. It was really interesting doing that and having the topic of the Athabasca River, because when I did go in Edmonton, that was one of my intention was to record the river. And I rented a car and found this spot where I thought I could go quite close to the water. And I went with a really sweet man I had met in Edmonton. And literally the spot we found towards the end when we were leaving, we saw like iridescent color on top of the water. And I was like, oh, what is this? And he said, well, I recognize that. It's definitely like the same thing as my uncle had at the gas station. This is like an oil spill. And so it just brought it so real when I was doing this trip of like, and then we actually like walked up the bank and saw a little pipeline poking through, which is just so normal in territories where, extractive industries are well and alive. And so, yeah, it just really brought it home to be able to do this feature for a really amazing organization called Raven Trust, which you can find all the information on the Spotify show, and there's lots of links and stuff like that. So now, traveling south. So this is my website, by the way. It's called tuneintotheworld.com. Welcome to explore. And this is the aquarelle version. I'm hoping to turn it into a really beautiful map as the other one. But this is like the journey I did through Brazil. And it was really challenging because, I guess traveling as a solo female traveler, there is always challenges there. But also I had never been to South America, I didn't speak any Portuguese, fluent Spanish though, so it helped a bit. And I literally arrived 2 days before the national elections, Lula Bolsonaro, which was just probably one of the most epic times to be in Brazil in my lifetime. And so I went around like with my mic trying to record people and also not really knowing even where I would go in the country. I had like a landing point in Rio, but the rest of the trajectory was like completely open. So, but what I ended up doing when I came back to the UK, I had an invitation to create a sound journey for a friend's event called Sing for Earth Day. And so I did that, and I created a script about my own journey through it. And I'm really excited because this was actually selected by Radio Frenia to be broadcasted by the Centre of Contemporary Arts in Glasgow on the 1st of September. So it was like super cool to hear my work on the radio, and yeah, felt a bit surreal. So again, I'm not going to share much. I'm just going to share the very beginning of it.
We are continuing priority boarding for Flight 349. Customers in Zone 1 are invited to board at gate 55.
Last autumn, I traveled to Brazil at the time of the national elections. I went with the intention to record sounds and stories of resistance and resilience in times of collapse and crisis. I created this sound journey to bring you on the road with me. I'm Louise Romain, anthropologist and campaigner for climate justice and indigenous rights. Take a deep breath and enjoy the ride. In the heart of Rio de Janeiro stands one of the world's largest urban forests, Floresta da Tijuca, the Tijuca forest.
This is a little teaser to like lure you into listening to more. And before my time runs out and before we do this little intriguing pieces of white paper thing, I just wanted to share with you some of the future trajectory I have in mind with my work. So, because I also acknowledge that there is a lot of wisdom and experience in the room, and I'm like literally a baby in the sound world. So I went to New York to cover the New York Climate Week a few weeks back. And one of the things that really landed with me is these things around echo chambers. And I've had conversations with some of you in the room, and thank you so much for some of your insights already. It's been super helpful. But basically realizing that in the philanthropic sector, only 2% goes to fund climate-related things. And so there is a massive need to like educate philanthropists and people with financial resources, which at the moment are mostly channeling their money towards tech and innovation. And in those rooms, there is mostly white guys listening to that. Whereas in the rooms where there is frontline voices being amplified and all of these stories of people who are the most impacted and that have contributed the least to the climate crisis, there will mostly be women, younger people, and black people or people of color, indigenous folks. So I'm really intrigued, like, okay, how can we bridge those spaces, those conversations? And one of the things I would really like to do with my work, and in general, like both the campaigning, but especially the sound production, is actually gear my production for philanthropists and feature both those stories, those voices, but also bring nature into their imagination and into their emotional bodies. And maybe like it's like I believe it's one of the ways that we can spiritually have this interconnectedness and this vision that is so key to indigenous cultures and cosmologies around the world that we are severed from, or that we have forgotten maybe in our cultures. And so that's like an ongoing quest. And if you have any thoughts on that, I really, really welcome them. And then a few other triggers I wanted to share with you, or challenging parts of my work, has been how to reflect on the extractivism of those stories and those knowledge, in the way that nowadays there is more and more indigenous or native-led media collectives. And so as a white European girl, I'm just wondering, like, what is the role of allyship in media production, and where do I position myself, and what's my role and responsibility in these conversations? And I know some of them are a lot more alive in Turtle Island, which is so-called North America, than in Europe, for example. But and then specifically one of the questions I have for myself is like, I want to, because I don't produce music, that's like maybe a lacking part in my content, but I have developed these relationships with really talented indigenous DJs from Canada and Brazil, and who have now become friends. And I'm curious, like, how to think about maybe redistribution, wealth redistribution, if my content does make some money at some point, like which kind of ethical contract I could build with them so that they are valued in their work, and where there isn't this reproduction of extractivism, which is shifting as well in academia, but definitely traditionally very, very alive. Yes. All right, little game, if we have time. So I would really like for you to write on this piece of paper a living being that you see needs more representation in the sonic world, and why. And the way I'm going to be collecting these, and the way to share it at the end, it's going to be if you can sound it, if you can mimic it. And before you do that, I would really like to, this is an invitation, feel welcome to do it or not. But the idea is to just maybe close your eyes and focus on your inner world, on your breathing, and connect back to your body, and see if there is any living being that you feel close to, and that deserves more representation in the sonic world. And I'm going to do like 1 minute or something. Yeah. Cool, thank you. last collecting thoughts moments. Cool. Is there any shares from the crowd and from that exercise or from any other questions? Yeah, amazing. Thank you. But also, if you want to voice whatever, you're super welcome to do that. You will have to come and take the mic, though. Yay, amazing.
People might challenge this.
Great. Thank you. Part of me wants to ask what it was, but I think I'm not going to do that. Leave it to the mystery. Thank you. Questions? Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's really inspiring. And yeah, I found it really difficult to settle on one living being, particularly inspired by some of the stuff that Sabine was saying yesterday and Karen Ducker's talk, and thinking about species that communicate outside or, our limited range of hearing. And bats, and I knew they echolocated, but I had no idea that they had really complex communication cores as well, and the whole world of plants and sound, and that we're just starting to scratch the surface of this stuff, these hidden worlds, So I'll finish with a bat sound.
Yeah, thanks everyone for your attention.
We have time for a couple of comments or questions.
Yeah, no, I'll translate it into English. I just want to say, I just think it's really inspiring. I spoke to you earlier in the conference, and you're clearly focused, driven, and I think that's very exciting. And I think the very fact that you're questioning your place in this is the start. I think that's so important because it's so easy to charge in, but the fact that you're considering how you're situated, what your privileges are, and how that you work ethically is such an important start. So yeah, all the best. Well done.
Anybody else? Yes.
Appreciate the work that you do, and I also have a question. Did you find some of the indigenous groups or people live in the rural places? Do you think they have the urge that they want it to be amplified in a way, or do they want to rather just stay away from the city or just leave them alone?
Really good question. Yeah. There's a big contrast between my experiences of traveling through Canada versus Brazil. So especially on the west coast of Canada, which was colonized much later, like if you say you're an anthropologist, you just get bad rep from the start. It's like really, really tricky terrain. And then if you say you want to record their stories, whoa, who are you? What are you doing on our lands? Have you been invited here? That's like often one of the very first questions. So unless you're actually invited, you're not necessarily welcomed. And this is like not everywhere, right? But definitely in some communities, it's super strong. And so what was really interesting is as a conversation to that. So the first and only time I spoke on the radio was in this like really small indigenous radio on Nuhak territory, which is in British Columbia, as you can see. And actually, I wasn't the one asking people, I was being asked. So they were asking me my understanding of indigeneity and sovereignty as an anthropologist. And there is this thing of like recognizing their self-determination and how equipped they are and how advanced they are. And so it's like almost like reversing the power dynamics there. But for example, in Brazil, in the small indigenous Pataxó community I went to in Baravelha, they were so keen to share. And so I think there is also maybe this thing about how in the English-speaking world, even though for like indigenous nations in Canada have lost or like are revitalizing their language, but like the supremacy of English has made it a lot more easy to disseminate their stories. But for example, for maybe Portuguese, it's a lot more like isolated maybe as a language, even though there's many Portuguese speakers. So, and also because of their stories, they talked about a genocide that happens in the Pataxó community. So, and I wasn't even going there in my question, but it was just this like stream of information, like really heavy emotional stuff. And that was really interesting to navigate because I'm fluent in English, as you can hear, but I really wasn't in Portuguese. So then there was this thing of like, standing there with my mic, interviewing this indigenous leader, and really like I could feel that they were like saying like really hard stuff, and I was understanding maybe 20-30% of it. So I think it's like depending on how far the discourse has come. So for example, in Canada, there is heavy discourses on decolonization, on indigenizing the media and equipping people, especially younger folks, with like media tools and practices, whether in Brazil it's a lot different stage at the moment. But that's a really good question. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Louise.